Right now, we're talking about what our next government must do to uphold equal rights. And before I introduce our panel, I'd like to say two things. First of all, I'm an ex-diplomat, and there are ex-diplomats in the audience. And during the coffee break, it was said that legal issues matter deeply. The ICC, the ICJ, what they do matters a lot. But there will be a need for diplomacy in order to get us from A to B. So I'd like to challenge diplomats in the room to offer to say a few words in the Q&A. Second thing I'd like to do is to draw attention to a strong economic document called Palestine Emerging. It's a new document, and there is a website called Palestine Emerging. It's not a political document, but it is based on the assumption that there will be game changers and that the Palestinian economy will be enabled to grow, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. And the question it tries to answer is, how will that happen? Who needs to work on it? A colleague of ours, a trustee of the Balfour Project, is among the authors of this document. There are about 100 authors, including Palestinians, internationals, Israelis. And I wonder if I could ask Baron Frankel just to stand for 5 seconds, just to say hi. And if anybody would like to have a word with Baron after, during the drinks, about economic prospects in the West Bank and in Gaza, how they can be made to flourish, as they need to flourish, then Baron is very happy to talk. So now to the panel, if I may. First of all, introduce the four so that they don't have to introduce themselves. Immediately to my right is Dr. Phyllis Starkey, Vice Chair of the Balfour Project. Previously, we came to know each other when we were both trustees of Medical Aid for Palestinians, where she was also Vice Chair. And for 13 years, Phyllis was MP for Milton Keynes Southwest. Chris Doyle, fortuitously, immediately to Phyllis's right, is the director of CAABU, the Council for the Advancement of Arab-British Understanding, which also forms the secretariat of several parliamentary organizations, one of them being the Britain-Palestine all-party political group, and a European gathering, European Parliamentarians for Israeli-Palestinian Equality, which meets on Zoom every couple of months to talk about work across Europe, including Norway, Spain, and so on, in aid of equality. Nour needs no introduction because she's already had one, and it's very nice to have you with us, Nour. It's an honor for the Balfour Project to welcome you to London. And our fourth panelist, who will actually speak third, is Yasmine Ahmed, UK Director of Human Rights Watch, a public international lawyer and human rights advocate who, in her time, has opposed Michael Gove's bill successfully, with help, but successfully, and worked very hard behind the scenes.
That is incredible.
Her colleague Omar Shakir, in April 2021, wrote a major report for Human Rights Watch on Israeli apartheid, a threshold crossed. And for his pains, he was expelled from Jerusalem. Human Rights Watch also opposes UK arms sales to Israel. So those are our panelists, and it's a pleasure to be with them and with you. I'll ask Phyllis to begin by saying a few words about the action points that the Balfour Project has drafted and which will be fine-tuned after today's conference. Phyllis.
Thanks very much, Vincent. Can people hear me at the back?
Good, excellent. So you've all got this document, so I'm not going to go through it in great detail. We're focusing on the UK government, not because we think that the UK is uniquely powerful, although it does have a history that's contributed, and not in a good way, to the situation that we're in the Middle East. But we focus on the UK government because it's our government, because it should be accountable to us, and because we have a duty to try and influence it, and because it's well placed to work with like-minded governments in the Middle East and elsewhere, and closer to home in the rest of Europe, to achieve change. So the Action Points document is an attempt to crystallise the key issues that we are focusing our activity on. It's not an exhaustive list. For example, it doesn't include the lobbying that we've been doing to get the UK government to fund UNRWA. It is a selected list, and on many of the issues, we've already been lobbying the government and the opposition on these issues, but we'll continue to do so. And we made this draft action plan available in advance of the conference deliberately on our website and to all our attendees, and we do welcome feedback. The focus is on events since the 7th of October, and it sets out, firstly, immediate actions which are required of Israel and Hamas, of which the most urgent is an immediate ceasefire and cessation of violence. So obviously the role of our government is to try and make sure that that happens. It also calls on Israel to remove all restrictions on humanitarian aid entering Gaza, to give unfettered access to all UN agencies, including UNRWA, to cease to use starvation and the destruction of civilian infrastructure as weapons of war, and to guarantee the safety of all humanitarian workers, medical workers, etc., and in the West Bank, to stop settler violence and freeze all settlement building. It then proposes a number of actions that the UK government must take to recognise the state of Palestine on pre-June 1697 borders, to end immediately any collusion of UK government or UK businesses in war crimes in Gaza, to ensure accountability for war crimes by supporting the ICC and the ICJ, and to participate in reconstruction, ending the occupation and supporting Palestinian civil society in democratic renewal, leading to an elected Palestinian government. We don't have a view on who should be in that government, what form it should take, or what their final demands should be. That is for the Palestinians themselves to decide. It is our duty to make sure they are able to make that to have that self-determination on the territorial basis of the state of Palestine. The Balfour Project will continue in lobbying of government and parliamentarians on these points and many others, but now we're in a general election campaign. So many of you, as individuals, have the opportunity to question potential MPs. And this is the moment when you get listened to, because you are voters and you can decide whether this potential MP actually is an MP. So you need to make the most of this opportunity. There are lots of local election hustings in most constituencies in the UK. So you should find out when the ones are in your constituencies. You should go to it. And we hope that you will use this list as a way of holding those candidates to account and reminding them that Palestine and rights of Palestinians are an important issue for British voters here in Britain, and that we expect a future British government to make sure that those rights of Palestinians are properly respected.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. Without further question now, but we'll come to questions after Nour has spoken, may I turn to Chris to say a few words about how he sees the attitudes of the four main political parties to Palestine and Israel.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Balfour Project for all that you do and for inviting me here today. I should stress before I start, I'm going to speak in a very personal capacity in analysing the elections and the positions of the political parties in the UK. My first comment is the nature of this election. And whilst we here may be very passionate and concerned about this issue of Israel-Palestine, I'm going to make one thing very clear. And we saw this, I think, in Tuesday night's leaders' debate. This is a very domestic election. Notably, and in contrast, of course, to 2019, the last election, Brexit was not mentioned once. So, although this issue of Gaza has been an issue in by-elections, notably in February in Rotherham, in local elections, I do not expect it to be in any way the predominant issue in this campaign. It will be in certain constituencies. Yes, there are, I think, 3 constituencies, for example, where British Muslims are the majority, but by no means are British Muslims the only part of the population, and I'll come to this, who are concerned about this. And there may be about 16 to 18 constituencies where it might make a difference. But this election will not be determined by international issues. It will be domestic, and in my view, it'll focus on the economy. And in some ways, that's a more traditional election than the last few that we've had. Now, this also has a problem, and a broader problem, because I don't think there is any debate also about Britain's place in the world. And I don't think the party leaderships are outlining where Britain is. What is Britain's future there? Let alone what it is towards the Middle East, yet alone what it is towards Israel-Palestine. Looking at public opinion, and CAABU and MAP have done 2 polls with YouGov since over the last 8 months. What is really striking is that British public opinion has been consistently in favour of a number of things that many of us are here, I suspect, would back. First of all, an immediate ceasefire. All the polls, and not just our ones, have shown in excess of 70% in support of an immediate ceasefire. Now, in any polling, that is substantive. When you look at those who intend to vote for the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrat, that rises to 86% and 88%, respectively, in the last poll we conducted in May. That's a very high level. Then have a look at something which is perhaps more contentious, the issue of imposing a UK arms embargo on the State of Israel. There have been 3 polls that I've seen done over the course of the spring, and the polling ranged 55% in favour is the lowest. That was the poll that we conducted. To the highest was 62%. But what I found interesting was that the percentage of those who opposed an arms embargo shrank in the last poll to just 13%. Just 13%, which is not, I'm sure you agree, a large bank of opposition. Younger voters tend to be more sympathetic with Palestinian rights. That might not surprise you. And it still remains an issue that largely gets more support from the right. But that said, on the arms embargo, 49% in one poll of conservative, those who intended to vote conservative, would back an arms embargo. And therefore, the obvious conclusion is that our political leaderships are not in any way in sync with public opinion on this issue. Furthermore, in polling that we've seen in Europe, in other EU states, in Ireland to Italy, Italy had the largest percentage at 65% in one poll in support of an arms ban. We also find this. So this going forward does present, I think, an increasing challenge for those political leaders who are out of sync with that public opinion. Let's have a look at the leadership on offer, because I think that is central in any election campaign. Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer are the 2 candidates to be Prime Minister. Neither of them, frankly, are either expert in the Middle East, nor are they that interested. Let me be very clear. The positions that they take up, once again, are rooted profoundly in domestic political reasons. We might wish that to be different. Let's be honest about it. Rishi Sunak knows that his party is essentially pro-Israeli in sentiment and has been for a while. He doesn't want to rock that boat, so he will keep to those lines. He also knows that Labour has an issue. He can see the splits that have risen in the Corbyn years and is very happy, therefore, to exacerbate it, to expose it, to see Labour councillors resign, to have these arguments. That's fine. Let Labour have these debates. For Keir Starmer, he doesn't want to be seen as Corbyn 2.0. He wants to say the Labour Party has changed. He wants to pose as a great leader. But he's also conscious he's going to have to deal with an American administration, whether it's Joseph Biden or further down the line, Donald Trump, possibly. Sorry. So he also is considering that. And he's taken advice, including from his predecessor, Tony Blair, on this issue. I'm afraid that is true, despite, I've said it before, his lack of success as a quartet envoy. In terms of the party positions, very quickly, I think what we've seen from the Conservative government, and just to summarize it, they've given blanket support for Israeli military operations in Gaza. There's been no criticism. Where you've seen criticism, it's been on the entry or lack of entry of aid into Gaza and on settlements and settlers. Insufficient on both counts, but that's as far as it goes. And at no point has the government been willing to say that Israel has violated international law. In terms of the Labour Party position, it took until February to get to a stage where they would call for an immediate ceasefire. They are better, and we have to acknowledge this, in terms of the ICC and ICJ, where they have spoken out in favour of the independence of those courts and their decisions must be respected. I'm sure Yasmine has far more to say on that. But they haven't gone for an arms embargo. They've called for a review. And I think that's interesting in terms of assuming Labour wins, and it looks like that, let's be clear, what happens on day one in terms of the attitude towards arms exports to Israel? And I think perhaps they were hoping that it was going to be an October and November election for this issue, because they're now going to have to make that decision whilst that military operation is ongoing. Also, in terms of Labour, we've seen a change in their policy position on recognition. It was in favour of immediate recognition, but back last autumn, they changed it. Now, I think that they are vulnerable to the electorate, to voters, to members, if you make your voice heard, that there should be a recognition. The other parties, very briefly, the Greens, Liberal Democrats and SNP, they do support an arms ban and they do support recognition. And I leave it open to the floor as somebody could tell me what the Reform Party's position is. But I'm going to go to the first 100 days, actually, in terms of looking forward and what we can do, as really important, because, frankly, with a 20-point lead, Labour's going to win this election. Keir Starmer is going to be walking through that door number 10, I think, barring something quite dramatic. So what are they going to do? Will Labour restore future funding to UNRWA? Day one, no reason to delay. Will it say something on the issue of international law? Arms, I've mentioned. Will there be a greater change of posture and position generally in all of this? What can you do? Well, Phyllis has already mentioned hustings. How many of you here have written to your parliamentary candidates in your constituencies? Come on, let's be honest.
Oh, wow.
It's a great showing, but those of you who can, please do. And not just with the, leading one. Get them all to put their positions on the record. Let us know about it too. Write to the leaders. Make sure that they're aware there is a concern about these issues. Doesn't take long. And I think going to those hustings and pressuring them, a new incoming government on day one, to take action. Because so far, let's face it, it's been lamentable. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll make sure there's time for questions. We'll make sure. Just on the point about writing to candidates, Matan mentioned that the Balfour project has drafted a letter, and we have worked with an organization called, I think, Organic Campaigns, which means if you put your postcode into the draft, which will come your way shortly, then by some miracle, the letter goes to all candidates, not just to the potential winner, but to all candidates. And then you can ask in that letter for a response. And it's a simple letter about recognition. It's focused on recognition.
Sorry, can I just add, make sure to put your postcode so they know you are their constituent and that you can vote for them or not vote for them. Otherwise, they definitely will not reply.
It's the voice of wisdom. Yasmine, you have a free hand. I haven't given you a task.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much to the Balfour project. Your work is incredible. It's incredibly important, and I'm very, very proud and honoured to sit here and be part of this wonderful conference. And also thank you to my co-panelists, some of whom I work very, very closely with, and also to all of you, because if it wasn't for people that continued to care, nothing will change. So your being here and engaging, I think, is so critical. So I wanted to address some of the points that were made by the audience after Anyas's speech. And I want to sort of think about and reframe where we're at. I understand that we sit here and we're frustrated. We are frustrated because we are all seeing civilians being killed, women, children. We saw it on October the 7th, and we've seen it for over 6 months now. I woke up to the news this morning that a refugee camp, an UNRWA facility, had been attacked. We woke up to news that's very likely, what's been reported is that there are 35 civilians who've been killed. It's very likely, those 35, that there will be children. And I looked at my 6-year-old son, and he was ill last night, and I looked after him, as a mum does. And I sat and I watched and I worried if he had a fever. He's living in London. We have a doctor 5 minutes away from us. He has a grandma upstairs, a dad and a mum who are watching over him. And I still woke up worried and panicked about him. And then I saw this news and I froze. I froze. Because I cannot even imagine what the mothers and fathers of Gaza are feeling right now. And I know that we do need to talk about what next. We absolutely have to talk about a road forward. Because it does not do justice to anyone to only talk about today and the suffering. But what I think is very important to say is that since the Nakba, the talk has been about what next. The talk has been about a peace process. And where have we got to? We have got to a place of mass atrocities. And I would say, and people will differ, and that is absolutely fine, that part of the reason that we have got here is because all we are doing is looking forward to a peace process, to a solution. And we are not looking at what is happening on the ground and the reality. And that's why they both need to go hand in hand. We cannot just talk about PA and about the Arab states and about a negotiation table and about next steps. We can't, because that will lead us to continue on a path that we have for over 6 decades. We need to talk about the situation, not just in Gaza. We need to talk about and contextualize that this has been decades of severe systemic repression of Palestinian people. such severe systemic repression that it amounts to the crime of humanity, of crime against humanity, of apartheid. We are not talking about two people coming to a table or groups coming to a table that are on equal sides, that this is a conflict where we bring two together and we find a way forward with equal power. So that nuance is the only way we are going to see a way forward, and is why we are talking about the suffering and why we need to keep talking about the suffering. But we do need to talk about the next steps. And I will say that I've been talking to, in the office of David Cameron, I've been in the office of Foreign Office officials, of the Attorney General's Department, round the clock, not Cameron, I would say. I'm not in his office every day, but I have met with him, but certainly with Foreign Office officials for the last 6 months. And I have said to them, you've set out a plan for next steps. I think it's a 5 or 6 point plan of your next steps. And while this plan on paper looks fine, the settlements in the West Bank keep expanding. The death of, if there ever was going to be a two-state solution, is continuing to die in front of your eyes while you set out a beautiful plan on a piece of paper of what's going to happen next. So what are you doing? Okay, a couple of settlers, individual violent settlers, got sanctioned. The settlements are a state-approved policy. The state arms the settlers, protects the settlers, fails to investigate the settlers. Issuing sanctions against a few settlers sits in stark contradiction to your pledge of a two-state solution and a way forward. Where are your sanctions against Ben Gvir? Where are your sanctions against Smotrich? Where are your commitments to a two-state solution? Human Rights Watch doesn't take a position on recognition. So I cannot speak to that question. But I would, in my personal capacity, be asking any current or future government about what their vision is for a two-state solution. First of all, ensuring that that can, in fact, be a reality on the ground, whilst we know settlements are expanding. Where are your sanctions? Where are even your basic bans on doing business with settlements? Where are they? Where is your guidance that's strong enough to businesses to say you shouldn't be doing that, like Norway has issued? Where are the levers that you do? You don't have many levers. Let's be clear. The UK is not the US. We don't have a vast amount of levers, but you do have levers. Why are you not exercising those levers, even talking about exercising those levers? You have a trade agreement with Israel. You have burgeoning and made commitments about future agreements with Israel on a number of matters, including cooperation on science, technology, military, and trade. Why are you not saying that these are up for review because our plan for a two-state solution and something different needs to happen? Human Rights Watch doesn't take a position on what that settlement will look like. But what we do say is that you need to take action to address the underlying human rights harms, because none of your plans are going to be achieved without that. Thanks to many people in this room, we no longer have the anti-boycott bill. Which sat as a travesty, again, and flies in the face of this, that a public body, the government themselves, can't take account of the abuses that are happening in settlements and not do business with those settlements, not invest or procure from those settlements. It would be banned under that bill. That's how far we were going to get. So thank you for stopping that. Arms. People have said only 2%, it's less than 2% the UK gives to Israel. First of all, that does not matter under the law. one component that is being used by Israel to enforce the blockade, to attack civilians, to attack aid workers, is enough to mean that you're legally obliged under domestic and international law to stop the licensing of military equipment. The UK government has acknowledged in the current judicial review brought by Al-Haq that there were, as at December last year, 28 extant current licenses and 28 future licenses are on their table at that time that they characterised as the most likely to be for equipment and components that were going to be used by the IDF in Gaza. We know that 20% of the components in the F-35s that are used in Gaza by the IDF now are manufactured, made in the UK. It is not acceptable. Legally, morally unacceptable. But let's think about practically. Let's set that aside. If any future government decides they come in, it would make a massive difference politically if they, alongside their key European allies, made a statement together and stopped the export of arms and military components licenses. It would make it would leave the US on a limb. It would highlight the fact that they are on their own. It makes a difference. You cannot come into power and say you are committed to a rules-based international order and international law and domestic law and the rule of law and not comply with it. You are potentially and likely being complicit in the violations that are happening now. And that means that not only the UK is complicit, but individual ministers and officials are complicit and potentially liable as well under criminal law for their aiding, abetting complicity. And we know that civil servants in the Department for Trade and Business have already raised their concerns and said that they were thinking about taking action as a result. UNRWA funding, as Chris said, if that is not something that is done within the first 100 days, I don't think we can hear anything about commitments to humanitarian provision, to ensuring that I don't want to hear any more concern from any government official or minister that we are so concerned that there is not aid getting into Gaza, that they're on the brink of famine, and you still will not lift your temporary suspension on UNRWA. In June, the UK's allocation will be up. We owe UNRWA money, or we are liable to pay UNRWA money in June. Do not stand there and talk about aid going into Gaza and blocking, and Israel blocking it while you have suspended money to the principal vehicle to provide for humanitarian provision. Reconstruction. Next day reconstruction. It will be critical for states to come together. But forward come hand in hand. Right now in the West Bank, Israeli settlers, armed, supported by Israel, are actually demolishing schools and other facilities that are funded by the UK government. So let's be clear again why accountability and why a day forward needs to sit hand in hand together. We will not be spending British taxpayers' money to then not say anything when Israel, in its next attack on Gaza, destroys the hospitals, the schools that we've spent millions of dollars to construct. Use your leverage. The next government, whoever they are, needs to use your leverage. We cannot continue to see the atrocities being committed and no leverage being used. It's not enough. And it will not be enough when the future generations look back, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and they ask, what did we do? That's what they asked about the Holocaust. That's what they asked about incidences that have happened in Srebrenica, in over history, what have happened when atrocities happen in Rwanda. What did we do? No one says, oh, well, we didn't have that much leverage. It wasn't that much. We do what we can. And the UK government's under an obligation under various international instruments to not only not be complicit, but to take positive steps to end violations of international law. That is the rules-based order. ICC, ICJ. It was great to see what Labor said in relation to the ICC, that they were strong and principled. I heard equivocation from Starmer, and maybe that needs to be clarified. If an arrest warrant is in fact issued, what will the UK government do? Will it, as it is required to under international law as a state party, the Rome Statute, give effect to that warrant? That needs to be clear. We do not need any equivocation in respect of that. Unfortunately, the current government's position continued on the path that they have been on, which is to, I would say, undermine the rules-based order. You can say that you don't necessarily agree with a case being brought, but when the court has made a decision, an independent court's made a decision, that's when you say it's for the independent court decision with the information and evidence before it. And what we've seen at the time again, that's not the position that this government has taken. And despite the fact that this government's continued position has been that it's not for the UK government to make these decisions about international crimes, it's for independent courts. But actually, in some instances, we're not going to agree with that. So I guess I end here by saying I urge the next government that comes in to take heed that this is a matter of legality, morality, and politics. And you need to be thinking with them all hand in hand. And you need to be thinking about the legacy that you will leave and about those people in Gaza who are relying on you right now because they have no one else to rely on. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmine. That was profound, and it's why you're here. Thank you. Nour, again, you have a free hand. We're near the end. We will have some questions, but if you'd like to say what you would do in our shoes.
Yes. I want to pick up on what was said and just focus on a few things. Recognition by the UK of Palestine is not just a matter of legal position. It is a historical debt owed to the Palestinians. And I think that British politicians need to be reminded of that, as annoying as it is. They need to always remember that they have a legacy that they need to rectify. The dimension of Balfour and British history and Mandate Palestine is triggering to 14 million Palestinians. And that we view what the UK does with a different lens. Okay? Not because we hold it on a higher pedestal, but because we see that London has an added responsibility. And so, like you said, there is an international, legal, moral responsibility, but there's a bilateral score to settle here. There's a correction of history that needs to happen. And don't settle for words. We've heard over the past 30 years of the so-called peace process that has gotten us all the way to genocide, that settlements are illegal, or as the Americans like to say, they're an obstacle to peace, whatever the hell that means. And yet the number of settlers has gone from 100,000 to 700,000. The settlers near my home were once in the horizon. Now I see them when I'm out in my balcony, in my comfortable neighborhood in Ramallah. In the village where I come from in southern Hebron, I can no longer have a balcony because it has been forbidden, because Palestinians are bothering the settlers when they look out their balconies. So it's not about saying the right thing, right? Because politicians are good at that. They can say a lot of nice things. We need to make sure that they're taking the actions. So if settlements are illegal, well, great. Now tell me that you're going to outlaw products coming out of that stolen land and from those stolen resources. That is the only way I'll understand that you really view settlements as illegal. Are you against the terrorism of settlers and those who arm those settlers? Great. Show me that you are doing what you are legally required to do and hold accountable those who are doing the policy and who are doing the arming, not individual settlers who can get away with it at the end of the day. And certainly don't do it like the US did, because they did a big splash and then they walked it all back. So not words. Don't settle for words, please. And don't settle for recognition only, right? That is a first step.
Yes.
It's a legal commitment. It's a political commitment that we build on. And it's a snowball that we have to kind of trap politicians into. They can't just get away with saying, look at me, I'm great. I've recognized Palestine, now I can go home. No, there's a lot more work to be done. And there's a lot of work to be done for reconstruction and in the day after, when that day after comes. But I think it's important to understand that those who can have a right to participate with Palestinians in rebuilding and healing, and perhaps and hopefully building a better future where we can be liberated from the colonization and colonized and colonizer reality as Palestinians and Israelis. Those who have been complicit in our mass slaughter should not, cannot, must not have a say or a stake in reconstruction. Accountability has to be at the forefront, and it has to hurt. Those who are committing war crimes and atrocities shouldn't complain that they're being punished. They don't want to be punished, then they shouldn't be doing the crimes. So yes, it needs to hurt. Being a colonizer has to be at a high cost. And that might hurt some good-intentioned people. But that is the only way. And I would, I would draw the parallel with apartheid South Africa. And I would remind everybody that the governments were the last to join when it became untenable for them to continue being complicit in apartheid. But it was the people, the constituents, the voters, who made sure that supporting apartheid became politically untenable. So it is within your power and ours together to make sure that happens. I'll stop here.
Now's the time for some questions. I would say we need 5 or 10 minutes. That's all we can do before I ask Phyllis to conclude. And I'd like to take questions in a group of 3, if I may. The gentleman who raised his hand.
Thank you. I must apologize. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a lawyer.
You must apologize.
Yes. One thing I have noticed, which Yasmine made a big point of, but which is not in the suggestions that you've put together, is holding Britain to account, which is the slogan, and which is why I joined the Balfour project. We have now a unanimous political position. We're run by a Zionist government, frankly, and we're going to be run by a Zionist government, and all the good wishes which Nour and Yasmine talk about, the desired policies, will not come from them because they have not been held to account. So that's why I'm talking as a lawyer. I think there are ways. I don't have a speech here, I only have a question, but I would like to invite anybody who is also a lawyer and who is interested in legal solutions to corner me during the reception afterwards, because I think we need to do a lot more on that line.
Thank you. Thank you. And then the gentleman at the back. Then I'll come to my left.
Hi. Hi, my name's Catherine from Middle East Eye. I just had a question for Chris, actually. I wonder what your view was on the Muslim vote campaign and if you think this wave of independence is going to influence Labour's position, make them more likely to do things like impose an arms embargo. Thank you.
Now a challenge for our helpers, just to reach the gentleman, unless you can shout.
Very direct and brief question. If I may, I would like to address it to Nour. We hear that United States administration is talking about normalization of relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia as part of the ceasefire and plan that they have. With your own background, may I ask you, if the United States of America's administration is successful in establishing the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia, how would the Arab street actually react to that?
Good question. Good question. So we had accountability, we had normalization, and then Catherine, you were directing your question to whom? To
Chris.
To anybody, particularly to Chris. Well, the accountability one, I guess we start with the lawyer.
I mean, it's a good question, and you have. I think that there's one question. I mean, there's obviously like legal issues here, but it's accountability for what as well in terms of past and present. You know, because the UK government is responsible, as Nour has mentioned, and is implicated in what ended up happening, the Nakba, essentially. I mean, they had a mandate, and that mandate was to resuscitate and be able to provide for the rights of the people within Palestine. And they completely and utterly neglected their responsibility. I mean, a responsibility that should not have been placed there anyway. It was, I mean, obviously the whole idea of the mandate system, but then obviously present as well. And I think it's always going to be difficult legally, but I don't think that it means that it can't happen. But obviously there are obstacles for holding officials, in particularly legally accountable for complicity, which obviously are quite detailed, but it's obviously harder to establish complicity than it is to establish direct responsibility. However, and it's something that I've been saying when I meet with Foreign Office officials and ministers, is that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And it might not happen in the UK. The UK government might not do it, but there is such a thing as universal jurisdiction. And that means, and obviously that will probably be exercised in relation to direct perpetrators, most principally, so Israeli officials, but also, as Anya said, dual nationals. But also, I think, you know, officials of other states should be concerned about whether, I mean, and we've seen increasing judicial activism and exercising of universal jurisdiction in, you know, what does that mean for them? So I think that absolutely officials should be on notice, and also we should be thinking about that. And then obviously state responsibility. And we know that Nicaragua brought a case against,
Germany.
Against Germany, thank you. And whilst they didn't get provisional measures, the court did not dismiss the case. And in fact, I think the court put on notice, and certainly did put on notice, all states that are licensing or sending arms to Israel. And it mentioned not only the Genocide Convention, but obligations under the Geneva Conventions particularly around Common Article 1. And Nicaragua sent a letter to the UK government and a number of other governments saying, we're putting you on notice as well. So I do think, and it's something that vexes me a lot, is ensuring, because what's happening in Israel couldn't happen but for the deep complicity, directly, as well as indirect complicity, diplomatic and other complicity. And I think that's probably true for many. I mean, we know, for example, in Sudan, that there's players involved in Sudan, but you know, we're sitting right here in the UK and we're voters in the UK, and it's our government that is complicit to some extent. And obviously in the US, it's to a greater extent. So I think the question of complicity is a really important one in this context. And I urge you and others to continue to think about that.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you very much. Two things. One, I just wanted a couple of comments on UK and accountability. Firstly, I think that the UK has got to stop treating Israel as a good faith actor. And it continually does that. It says Israel should investigate. There's been the killing of a child in the West Bank, as if there's any history of proper, credible, independent investigations into its own conduct. That has got to end. Secondly, I'm fed up with government ministers. You know, they go in front of a select committee or whatever, David Cameron, Anna Mitchell, Lord Ahmed, and whenever asked about international law, they say, well, I'm not a lawyer. Yeah. There's so many examples, but then when it comes to, you know, other questions, they can be a lawyer in that, oh, I'm afraid, you know, they haven't, there's no evidence that they've committed. Oh, you're a lawyer now.
And just remember that, and that won't be a defense if they're ever before a court either.
Absolutely. And they didn't have any problem in their lack of legal knowledge when it came to Syria or Russia or other countries in doing that. Muslim vote and independent candidates, of course, you know, this is an election where Israel-Palestine is once is an ingredient. It is in the mix of issues that are being discussed. And of course, we've seen this Muslim vote initiative and independent candidates. What I think that the party machines and leaderships have failed to take into account is how much the British Muslim communities are far more engaged in politics than they were 20 to 30 years ago. They are far more politically aware, astute. They are no longer prepared to be taken for granted. And their trajectory in terms, you know, from when they first had a British Muslim MP to where they are now is extraordinary. That will only get more pronounced. And they are not prepared to be ridden roughshod over or be ignored. So it will make a difference in some constituents. And certain independent candidates will benefit, and they will potentially make a difference in certain you know, constituencies. My point was, it's not going to make a big deal, you know, whether you like it or not, to the overall result, which looks like a big Labour majority.
Thank you. And Nour on the Arab Street.
What is that? Two things. Normalization with Israel has been, I think, center stage of American policy, declared and not. So even before we saw the so-called Abrahamic Accords, and I think we need to understand what they are in essence. And what they are in essence is making sure that Israel is the boss in the region, right? Militarily, in terms of security, in terms of economy. There's an overlord. That overlord represents the bigger overlords, and everybody else is willing to play. In exchange, Israel will give our beautiful, where are the diplomats there? Our beautiful despotic regimes in the region all the intelligence gadgets that they need to spy on the opposition, perhaps even murder the opposition, or at the very least jail them and make their life hell. So there is an implicit deal in this normalization frenzy. It wasn't just Trump, it's also Biden. In fact, what Biden is doing is far more dangerous, because in the middle of a genocide, he is presenting the biggest prize of all, Saudi Arabia, right? Because after that, who wouldn't go running and normalizing? I think the price for Saudi Arabian normalization has gone up for purely Saudi Arabian reasons, not necessarily just because of the genocide, but there was an opportunity for Saudi Arabia to leverage everything that was happening, and they did drive the price up. Politically, I'm not sure they're willing to give Biden that win. But I would say that they would be amenable to reaching a deal with the deal maker if he comes into office, God help us. But I do think that right now, Israeli-Saudi normalization wouldn't be possible with throwing the Palestinians entirely under the bus, right? So they have to have a gesture, and it's up to us to make sure that it's not just a gesture, it is something meaningful. So no promises of mirages that are called horizons, no promises of processes. There needs to be something more concrete, and Saudi can get it if it wants to.
Thank you. Maximum 3 last questions. Sui, may I just introduce Sui Ang, co-founder of Medical Aid for Palestinians.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Actually, there are 2 questions, okay? Hiba wants to ask a question. So can I let her ask the question before I say mine?
We're doing 3, then we...
Not all from 3, but
Okay, I'll ask my question first, okay? Simple question, okay? This is a fantastic day, and thank you very much. I've learned so much and collected a whole basket full of things to do, okay? But now I've got one thing for you to do. If you look at peace with justice, how to get there. Bullet point 1, I agree. Bullet point 2, I also agree. I think everybody agrees. There is one bullet point which I really want you to add. You might say it's not possible. Okay, Israel to stop bombing Palestinian civilians, especially in the safe zones designated for them. I think that will add balance. I don't know what everybody thinks, but that's what I feel.
Thank you. You passed the baton to Heba, and then there's one more. Yes, the lady.
Quick question.
Heba first, and then the lady.
Just a quick question. What do we do with the British citizens who go to Israel and fight for the Israeli army and come back home with impunity?
And the lady immediately behind. This is the last call, I'm afraid.
There's something it might be worth thinking about. According to the Old Testament and the Quran, Abraham had 2 sons, one through his wife and one through a concubine. The sons were called Isaac and Ishmael. It was also foretold that both sons would spawn large nations. What we're actually now seeing in between Israel and Gaza, it looks like a kind of sibling rivalry thing. Palestine originally belonged to the descendants of Ishmael, but after the war, they very kindly opened their doors to the descendants of Isaac. But obviously now, the descendants of Isaac want the whole land, the whole inheritance. And the only way to stop that is to actually divide the inheritance in half. And they should be, instead of fighting one another, helping and supporting one another, because they're actually brothers. The Israelis and the Arab nations are descendants of Abraham. And they're very, very interested always in boasting about the fact, that particularly the Israelis, that they are the sons of Abraham. And I think really it's time to go back to their roots and say, hey guys, you know, this was an inheritance Abraham left for you. You need to learn to share it. If they share it properly and help and support one another, both Israel and Gaza or Palestine will become very prosperous nations. And if that happens, all this turmoil will die down.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. Thank you. Phyllis, could you say a word about Sui's remark?
Right. Yes, we'll take account of it, Sui, when we're taking the thing forward. Right. Yeah.
Vincent, I think there was a lady.
And Heba, Chris.
I just want to say one thing about Sue. I think you mentioned safe zone. There is no safe zone in Gaza. And the only safe zone I'm interested in hearing about is Gaza as a safe zone.
Yeah.
There's another speaker over there. Question.
There was a question about,
Ms. Palestine.
Okay,
Yes.
one last question, Ahlam. Last question, end of story.
The fighters, I can reply to that, but maybe I'll do it after this.
Big gratitude and thank you for holding this conference. And to be honest, I followed the Balfour project right from the beginning. And of course, you have earned credibility as well as a good voice. And therefore, what really always I've been questioning why you do not mention moral responsibility for the British government, why we do not try to reach to the public generally, more public than what, that there is a moral responsibility. And not only this, that Palestinians have been denied, not only all of these years, they have been denied the UN resolution 181 and accepted the minimum. So I think it's about time to say it clearly. And I am sure you will earn more and more credibility. And thank you for this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Nour, we should, you've said something about responsibility already and what we should do in our shoes. But I think we should give you the last word as the Palestinian on the platform, just a word, and then turn to Phyllis to summarize the event.
Yasmine, you wanted to say something about?
I can talk to it.
Okay. First of all, I'm really honored and overwhelmed to be here, and very grateful for all the support that I've heard, for the open mind with which you've heard everything I had to say, and thankful that I've been given a chance to not just speak my mind, but to really carry a big responsibility. Before I came here, I asked my friends in Gaza for their permission to leave and come here without feeling too much guilt, that I would be in a safe place. And I asked them what they wanted me to say to you on their behalf. And the one thing they said was, tell them we can hear them. So I just wanted to conclude with that.
Phyllis, thank you.
So I'm not intending to summarize everything that people have said because you've all been here and you've heard it along with me. But I do just want to follow on really from what Nour just said and what in fact she'd said earlier in the previous session where she said that that Palestinians counted on us to pressure the US government. And I think that's should be a spur to us to carry on doing what we are doing, but to do it more and do it better, basically. Because that is what we can do. Of course, we can empathize, and it's very important that we do empathize with Palestinians and what is happening to Palestinians. But simply empathizing does not change anything. We have to convert that empathy into action, and we have to be realistic about the sorts of actions that we can take within a democracy like ours. In many ways, we're very fortunate in that we are able to do things that a lot of people in other countries may not do without finishing up in prison. But we don't do those things enough. And we need to think strategically and politically with a small p, not party politically, but politically. It's no use asking things that we know the government or the opposition are absolutely not ever going to entertain. We have to start from where they are and then move them further in the right direction. And you have to ask relatively small things to get us to big things. Don't ask the big things. Aim for the big things, but ask things which are the small steps that will get you nearer. And then when you've got your first step agreed and they've done it, then you go back with the next step. It's very tiresome, it's terribly bureaucratic, and it's kind of soul-sapping because just sometimes you want to say to politicians, look, for God's sake, just get on with it. You must see what you should be doing, but never say that because it makes you feel better. It doesn't actually advance the cause. So that's my advice as a former politician as to how to approach politics. It's tedious, but you need to follow it within the rules and within the framework. And that's a discipline that you have to follow if you want to be effective. And we owe it to Palestinians to be effective, not to do things that just make us feel better. Blunt. That's my message. That's not necessarily Balfour's message. I didn't clear it with anybody. So nice not to. Right. But so I do want to say that. The second point I want to make is to pick up on this issue about the rule of law and the wider effects of what are happening when our government and the governments go on being selective about the rule of law, and the difference between responses on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the responses on Israel's attacks against Gaza. And I concede that there is a slight difference in that in this instance, this particular round of violence was initiated by Hamas attacking Israel, whereas Russia's invasion of Ukraine wasn't actually provoked by anything. They just did it. But with that tiny, tiny difference, the comparison between the way in which we have then our governments have applied very effective sanctions against Russia, which, if applied against Israel, would, for example, mean that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich would be sanctioned, just as members of the Russian parliament have been sanctioned, just as members of the Russian administrations within the Donbass have been sanctioned, so all the settlement governments would be sanctioned. If we actually just transferred across to Israel-Palestine all of the things that we and European Union states have done in relation to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that would be a good start, actually. And it's a model that you need to present people all the time. You've done it in this case. Why are you not doing it in these other cases? So we're not asking something that governments haven't done before. But we also, I do think, do need to make the point about the rule of law, how important that is to us and how it protects us as well as everybody else, because politicians also respond to self-interest. We in Britain have a self-interest in the rule of law being maintained and its credibility be maintained. And it's outrageous if our government is undermining the credibility of the system which protects us along with everybody else. And we should be making that point as well, because it engages a lot more people, I'm sorry to say, than when we talk only about the very important issues that relate to Palestinians. We need to also talk in this context about the wider implications that it has through its attack on the rule of law. So I'm sure the rest of you will have already made up your own minds about what the most valuable thing about the conference today was, but my job now is just to thank everybody involved, certainly to thank all of our speakers, to thank Daniel and Nour in the first session, who set us off to an excellent start, and we very much valued the frankness of both of you. Agnes, who did the keynote speech, and Mohammed, who shared with us his experience, and Yasmine and Chris and Nour again on this panel. So can I thank on your behalf all of the speakers, all of the people who have helped in the organisation of this conference, in the Balfour project, and particularly in our partners in King's College, and to thank King's College for the venue, for the support that Adam and the event staff have given to us in making sure that it was fairly smooth running, even if it is about to overrun if I don't stop. And also to the friends and donors who supported the work of the Balfour project. We will continue to use those resources as effectively as we possibly can to take forward this work and to achieve peace with justice that both the Palestinians and the Israelis deserve. And thank you to the audience.